Adam's share. The weekend is over. Monday is here. We've got 9 games, and coming off of one of the greatest episodes of television ever witnessed. Although you don't watch it, Adam. You don't watch Game of Thrones.
I do not.
I don't think you understand what you're missing. You would enjoy it.
I've seen a season or two of Barry. I need to get caught back up on that, but I'm not too concerned about missing Game of Thrones.
You've seen a season or two of what?
Barry.
Barry?
The show that comes on after Game of Thrones. Yeah.
Oh. That's disappointing. Anyway, it was the greatest thing.
You don't watch Barry?
No.
Okay.
Maybe I will. I don't know. I'm always willing to try new shows, but this is like the greatest thing ever. And yesterday I heard a lot of people complaining about, the script was bad and the dialogue was bad. Shut up and enjoy it. It was phenomenal. Just have fun and enjoy it. That's what I did. I know Josh said
there is a certain level of entertainment you get if you don't watch it though, and then you just get all these tweets with like the most ridiculous names ever and no idea what. And it just is like your entire timeline is tweeting about like God knows what.
That is great because you have no idea what the names are, like at all.
Yeah,
right?
No.
Who is Jorah? Who is Lady Mormont? Right. Yeah. I mean, I could see that, but I'll tell you this much: if you're ever going to sit down and just start something from the beginning, do it. Just do it because it's well worth it. You won't regret it. And it's, I've actually, this might sound messed up. I'm not going to say anything here. I'm not going to spoil anything here if you haven't watched it, but I've been intentionally tweeting, like live tweeting with Game of Thrones, because I get so annoyed by people who say, "Oh, you asshole, you're spoiling the show," while they're on Twitter at the same time that it's actually happening. Like, stay off of Twitter. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, what do you say we get into it and get ourselves started? 9 games.
Yeah, let's go.
All right. First of all, before we get into anything further, any weather here that's concerning you?
Nope. Not that I've seen.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything either. It looks like everything's actually really clear. So, all right. Yeah, Josh said everybody sounds fine, just making sure. I think your video's choppy, but we'll get that squared away. Let's kick it off. Washington, St. Louis, Patrick Corbin, Michael Wacha. He has been activated from the 10-day injury list, or injured list. And we have a pretty interesting spot for Corbin because he has struck righties out at a really, really high clip over the past couple of seasons. The same thing this season as well. Now you've got looking at the lineups for Monday. We have Carpenter, Goldschmidt, DeYoung, Ozuna, Martinez, Molina, Jerko, Bader, Wacha. So I'll just throw Wacha in here for the sake of it. The only lefty in this lineup is Carpenter. So they're going to go full out righty onslaught, but he strikes righties out at a high clip. The only difference to me is once I saw the Twins lineup, it put Verlander kind of far away above everybody else. But where are you at here with Corbin?
Yeah, and I mean, the other problem I have with Corbin is while he is really good against righties, he's a really good pitcher overall. It's a lot of really dangerous righties in this Cardinals lineup. Like, there's not easy outs in here. Even the lefty Carpenter, is good, but Goldschmidt, Ozuna, DeYoung, Martinez, Molina, like these are all difficult outs. And then even at the bottom, you have power with Jed Jerko and Harrison Bader. So it's a pretty scary spot. I also have Verlander ahead of him, and then I'm also getting to more Zach Wheeler than Corbin, and I'm getting to more of the like cheaper mid-range on the 2 pitcher sites just because of the bats that it lets me get in. So Corbin clearly, has a nice ceiling because he's just a really good pitcher, but I'm still getting less of him than other guys at the top.
Yeah, me too. And then Michael Wacha, I just have zero interest in. I don't know. Maybe you have a different opinion here, but Eaton, Robles, Soto, Kendrick, Adams, Carter, K-Boom, Dozier, Gomes, Patrick Corbin. What do you see on the on both sides of this one?
Yeah, so I mean, Wacha, I'm really not interested in either. He's not a particularly good DFS pitcher. I don't think he's that good of a real life pitcher, and he's not cheap here. There's not, at least I don't think that there's like a flawless, clear cut SP2 on this slate, but Waka is more expensive than most of them. He still has a really difficult matchup against Washington. You have some right handed power, even though Anthony Rendon not being in the lineup does help a bit. But Victor Robles, I think, still a good play. Juan Soto, of course, is a good play against anyone. So yeah, not the easiest spot for Waka, and he's a little bit more expensive than I would like.
All right, so is this a game where you're looking at any hitters? I mean, we know that St. Louis is dangerous. We know that Washington's a pretty quality offense, but is this one where you're kind of staying away from overall, or are you picking some batters out of this?
I think my highest exposures in this game will probably be to St. Louis's offense, just because of how much power upside they have and the price tags that you get for that power. You have obviously like Goldschmidt at 4,600 on DraftKings is underpriced, but even more so, where you have to roster a catcher, you have a reasonable price tag on Yadi Molina, you have a reasonable price tag on Martinez, Jerko, and Harrison Bader. So I think it gives you a pretty decent ceiling against, it's a pitcher in Corbin who's really good, but it's also a bad Washington bullpen. So if you can just get into that early on, you have a team that, could really pile on a lot of runs. And then actually getting to, I just pulled up the initial crunches I ran. Washington was my fourth highest owned stack. St. Louis was my sixth. So both of those teams I'm getting a pretty healthy amount of.
Okay. Let's talk Boston and Oakland. Eduardo Rodriguez, Frankie Montas. Montas does kind of what he's always done. He gets a lot of ground balls, a lot against righties particularly. And Erod's been solid, but he's going to walk batters, and he's been getting strikeouts. It's just, well, you know what? Let's talk about Erod first. This is an Oakland team that this season, granted only like 300-something plate appearances, they're not striking out at all against lefties, but we know that there are some strikeouts in this lineup. It's just such a dangerous lineup at Fenway Park against the lefty. Erod scares the hell out of me today. Do you like him though?
Not really. So the most appealing thing that I can say about Erod today is that with looking at projected ownership, he's projected for almost none. And you don't really have a lot of clear-cut options. I can give you things that I don't like about guys like Corbin and Wheeler. I can give you things I don't like about basically every pitcher on the slate except for Verlander. So from that standpoint, taking on some risk at low ownership for a guy that does have a 15.5% swinging strike rate against righties this year is appealing, but I'm still not getting to a lot of it. Like in my initial crunch, I have around 10%, and that's because I think it's a really scary spot. You have a bunch of right-handed power bats for Oakland going into Boston in the Fenway Park. We know that's a park that plays up right-handed power. It's a nice ballpark shift for the Oakland bats, and you have some reasonable price tags on them as well. I think that Chris Davis at 4,300 on DraftKings, probably one of the more underpriced hitters on the slate from an upside standpoint, and Stephen Piscotty at 4,300 is fine as well. It's a spot where I don't love picking on Eduardo Rodriguez, but I just think that he's a little bit more expensive than I would like to get to.
Yeah, me too. I still, and I'm not opposed to some of these Oakland bats. Decent prices, Fenway Park. We got the monster in left field. Semien leading off, Chapman batting second, Piscotty, Davis, Pinder. It's a good lineup, man, and this is a lineup that can score runs in bunches. So I have respect for Eduardo Rodriguez, but I also don't hate this Oakland A's team. On the other side, you've got Boston going up against Frankie Montas. The Red Sox have struggled this season, but we know, offensively, they still have one of the more potent offenses in the league with Betts and Martinez and Bogarts and Benintendi. How do you view this matchup against Montas at home, where they do have a high total? Right now it's at 4.9. I think last night it was 5.1, but still the second highest on the slate.
I'm getting to a lot of them. They're right up there with Houston for me on DraftKings. They're also really cheap on Yahoo. And I think that's the reason I'm getting there. Frankie Montas isn't someone that I normally love taking hitters against because he does a good job of usually not getting blown up, but he's also not a really high strikeout guy. And we know how good this Boston offense is. But when you looking at DraftKings pricing today, we're kind of back to where we were earlier in the season, where it's really hard to make teams that you like top to bottom. because there's not great cheap pitching, and a lot of the bats that you want are expensive. Relative to other teams, Boston's actually kind of inexpensive. You have a lot of these guys for, mid 4Ks price tags, which is really appealing. On Yahoo, I think they're all less than $20, including Mookie. So it's all $19 for Betts and Martinez. Everyone except Michael Chavis is less than $21 or less than $20. So it's a team where, like, relative to the rest of the slate, they're actually pretty inexpensive for one of the most talented offenses in baseball. So I have them right up there with Houston and Atlanta as one of my favorite stacks.
Yeah, to me, this is one of those spots where it's kind of just play the talent. And I think that's what we get to with Boston. Yes, Montes will get a lot of ground balls, some weak contact, but he's not going to miss a lot of bats. And you just have really good hitters here, as you put it, at price points that are pretty low. By the way, it is wild that Chavis is less than or more expensive than Martinez, Bogarts, Benintendi, and Betts.
Yeah.
But he's hitting really well. So I'll give him that. No denying he's playing well. He's got 3 home runs over his last 5 starts. And he's another right-handed addition to this team that makes stacking, a little bit easier because he has that second base eligibility. I'm with you here. Again, I have enough respect for Montes, but the question is, you don't see Montes get blown up very often. And then Oakland's bullpen really isn't terrible. But this also, just to me, isn't one of these slates where there's any teams outside of, I think, 2 of them that I'm really in love with from a stacking standpoint.
Yeah, it's a weird slate in that regard because we are going to talk a lot about how there's not any clear-cut pitching, or not very much, but there's not really clear-cut stacks either. It's just like a bunch of mediocre, somewhat overpriced pitching options that don't really get blown up all that often either. And on slates like that, I think you really, more so than always, you're looking for just kind of like pricing discrepancies relative to the slate, which you're getting with Boston because they're a stack top to bottom that should be more expensive than pretty much everyone, in these mediocre matchups. And you are just, being willing to take on talent, like you said, instead of, targeting 1 or 2 specific pitchers. And, I think Boston just fits both of those categories.
Do you have any change in strategy or differences that you do on a slate like this where there aren't a ton of stacks that really stand out as, great ones or under-owned stacks that you really like? Are you doing lesser stacks in terms of, instead of 5-3-4-4, maybe some 3-3s or anything different than what you'd normally do on tonight's slate?
On DraftKings or Yahoo, I don't mind maybe playing because I crunch a bunch of lineups, different stack types, and then just kind of sort out my lineups and play whatever I get. But I don't mind the idea of, normally I won't really go less than like a 4-man stack with 4 one-offs. On slates like this, I don't mind as much going to like a 3-man stack or something like that. But in general, no, it's more so that I'm just, going to get more exposure to teams in mediocre spots that have a lot of talent than I would on, slates where there's 2 or 3 gas skins out there.
All right, fair enough. Anything else on this game you want to talk about before we move on?
No.
All right, Mets, Cincinnati, Zach Wheeler, Tanner Roark. All right, so when you look at the totals here, 3.3 for Cincinnati. It continues to decline throughout the day. And then for the Mets against Roark, they're at 4.3. I think I have a different read on this one than the field does, so I'll get your opinion on it first, and then I'll give you mine. What are you doing with Zach Wheeler?
He, in my initial crunch, is my 5th highest owned pitcher on DraftKings. I have less Wheeler than Verlander. I have more Wheeler than Rodriguez and Soroka and Maeda and Corbin. So he's my 2nd of the expensive pitchers. It's a Cincinnati team that's been really bad this year offensively.
They
but
don't strike
going
out.
Forward, what did you say?
I said they really do not have a lot of strikeouts in this lineup.
Right. So going forward, I don't think they're going to be as bad as they have been. Like, the track record's there for a lot of these hitters, and they're not, a bottom 5 offense in baseball, and the strikeouts aren't really there. Wheeler has the kind of stuff where, if he has the stuff that he had in his last start, he's going to strike out anyone. It really doesn't matter. But if he's not, at the absolute top of his game, it's a Cincinnati team that should at least be able to put the ball in play and maybe limit his upside a little bit. So on a slate where there's so many expensive bats, like I'm not really getting a lot of Verlander plus Wheeler lineups, and I'd like to get to Verlander where I can. So that's why Wheeler's ownership drops a little bit for me, but I still have him as my second expensive guy behind Corbin and Maeda and Soroka.
Oh, well, okay. So you have Corbin and Wheeler above Verlander, huh?
No, Verlander's my number one.
Oh, okay. All right. I was going to say that really surprised me given the lineup the Twins rolled out today.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, but you look at this Reds lineup and it's like Iglesias, Peraza, Winker, Votto, Barnhart. They don't strike out at all. Some of them like 12% range. Iglesias, Peraza, Winker, Votto, Barnhart. Like you said, if Wheeler has his best stuff, it probably won't make a difference like we saw with Verlander last start against a tough Minnesota lineup. But at the same time, I think it's only right to realize that there aren't that many Ks here. I mean, Schebler strikes out, a little bit above the league average. It's 26% around. And then Suarez probably around 23% or so. It is a tough lineup to K. And then Votto is one of those guys that'll just, force your hand every single time. So even though they haven't been good, they're not the best fantasy matchup. And that's kind of where I'm at today. As far as Tanner Roark goes, I'm not interested in him, but I do have some interest in the Mets on a night where, there aren't, like I said, aren't a lot of teams that really stand out as great stacks. I actually see the top of this lineup, the lefties at the top of the lineup being pretty interesting to me. McNeil, Nimmo, Conforto. Roark has struggled against lefties quite a bit, and he's not a guy I generally like to pick on, but I think in some spots where you can get him at decent prices, I'm okay with that. The whole lineup, it's not great, but I think you could do worse than this Mets team. You doing anything with any hitters in this game?
Yes, I mean, I agree with you. Right now, Roark's my third highest owned pitcher on DraftKings. I probably will end up with a little bit less than that just because he will probably be highly owned and because I don't really like the spot. It's more of just, he's there at a reasonable price point and I need pitchers. So that's why he's up there. Normally when those guys are popular, I lose a little bit of them. And I do agree with you that the top of the Mets order in particular is pretty appealing. I do really like $3,900 Brandon Nimmo. He's got a lot of power and he's really cheap here from the left side against Roark. Conforto batting cleanups, a nice play. It's like you said, it's not the best lineup, but you do have some power there. Nimmo's the one that I like the most.
All right. Yeah, I like McNeil's price point. Just the fact that he's leading off too doesn't hurt either. Good opportunity to see 5 plate appearances potentially. McNeil and Nimmo there for me and Conforto. I like the lefties mostly here. Let's talk about Atlanta and San Diego. The highest total on the slate goes to Atlanta. I like this team a lot more when they're facing lefties. It's just, I wish Camargo was in the lineup. That would be cool. He's not. But you still have a decent amount of guys here in Albies who crushes lefties. Acuna, Freeman's fine against lefties. Donaldson, we can get into this season against lefties. It's been brutal, but for his career, I mean, if you're looking career-wise, he's been excellent. And Margevicius really hasn't shown much outside of the fact that he's made 5 starts and now has to face a team that very seldom strikes out against lefties. What are your thoughts here? We'll start with the offenses. What are you doing with this Atlanta team against Margevicius?
Atlanta's a top 3 stack for me. The price tags aren't super appealing, but there's not a lot of super appealing price tags for full stacks on the slate. And I know he's been decent so far, but I just still don't buy into Margevicius. And I think part of the reason he has such good numbers, or reasonably good numbers so far, is he's faced San Francisco multiple times. That's going to inflate your numbers.
Sure.
There's just no reason to me that this should be a guy that we're scared to roster hitters against, especially on a slate like this one where there's negatives about most matchups. So, I love Atlanta. I'm with you. I wish Camargo was in the lineup, but at least, with Markakis, with Freeman, you do have 2 lefties that can handle left-handed pitching. You do get Albies from his good side of the plate. Acuna is one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. Donaldson, I think, is a good play. And then you can cover, not at not at great price tags, which is unfortunate, but you can cover the shortstop and catcher positions with Flowers and Dansby Swanson, to at least get some correlation and cover up your weaker positions. So I wish they're a little bit cheaper, but from a full stack perspective, it does still make Atlanta a little bit more appealing from a roster construction standpoint.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I also, what do you think of Mike Soroka here, who made 2 starts this season? Usually he's a command pitcher. He has struggled at times to shorten his innings up, but he was allowed to come out for the 6th inning with 100 pitches or so, which was really nice to see. Through 109, is missing a good amount of bats. He has a good slider. His fastball looks good, but his price tag isn't exactly cheap. So I'm curious to know where you stand on a guy like Soroka against this San Diego team.
The price tag is what's keeping me away the most. He's a pitcher that I like. I think that he's got good stuff.
He's good.
Most importantly, like you said, very, very, very good command, moves the ball in and out well, and can set hitters up that way. So he's a pitcher that I do like, but on this particular slate, it's like, if I'm going to pay $8,600 for Soroka on DraftKings or $40 for Soroka on Yahoo, like I'd rather pay $43 for Zach Wheeler than Soroka, or I'd rather pay $93 for Wheeler than $86 for Soroka. So I got to basically the same amount of Soroka as I did Rodriguez in my initial DraftKings crunch. That's kind of where I have him at. I was getting more of him than Corbin, for example, and more of him than Maeda, because there is a little bit bigger price gap there. But I have less of him than Wheeler or definitely Verlander.
Yeah, if Soroka was in like that mid 7K range, I think I'd really like him today.
Yeah, he'd probably be my highest or second highest owned non-Verlander pitcher.
Yeah, but like you said on DraftKings, 86, and then are you gonna? I mean, I'd even take Kenta Maeda over him on Yahoo, where he's a dollar more expensive. Maeda's 41, Soroka 40, Wheeler 43. He's just not at a price point that makes it easy. I talked about him in the deep dive today, writing up all of the reasons I like him, and then coming to the conclusion that it's hard for me to pay that much for him. Obviously, Margevicius is not a guy that I have any interest in. I really like Atlanta. But do you have any interest in San Diego bats before we move on?
They're really inexpensive, which on one hand is nice because it's not like they're a team that lacks power anymore. They do have Renfroe, Machado, Reyes all in the lineup, which is nice. But because they're so cheap, I think they're going to have more ownership than they probably should against Soroka, given that it's still not a very good lineup. You have the 3 guys that I mentioned, but then you also have Greg Garcia, you have Eric Hosmer taking up your first base position and probably doing nothing. You have Ian Kinsler probably doing nothing. So it's not like it's a deep lineup. You just have a few, powerful hitters in it. And I think their ownership will be a little bit elevated because they're one of the few teams that, will let you get, Verlander plus Wheeler or something like that. So they're coming in as like a top 10 stack for me, but I have like 7 teams out of them.
Our ownership projections have a couple of these guys with like really high ownership projections. Yeah. Ian Kinsler for one, like really high up there. I don't really get it. I mean, my initial DraftKings crunch, I think last I saw we had Kinsler at like 35% projected ownership. 42 now. 42 on DraftKings as the highest projected owned player, and 42 on FanDuel right now is the highest projected. Granted, he's 2,200 on FanDuel, and then on Yahoo we have Kinsler down at 9% at minimum salary, but likely because there are a lot of really cheap guys on Yahoo that you don't really need to go there.
Right.
So I guess we'll see. I mean, that is really high ownership. God, that's insane. So I guess
I'd much rather, I understand that he's cheap, but if I'm going to San Diego, it's just, Kinsler's not that high of an upside guy, and rostering a popular player as a one-off just because he's cheap, it's just like when he hits a home run, you see people like Victory Lap it on Twitter, but it's like it didn't get you anything because everyone used that roster construction. You're still not winning any money unless you just happen to hit the nuts everywhere else. Why not, let a huge percentage of the field just take the normal, single and nothing else, and find the way to get value elsewhere.
Right. And another thing too, I get it. He is very cheap, But it's not like this is a stellar matchup. Soroka is a good pitcher. Like, yes, he's still got a long way to go, but Soroka's going to be pretty good. He's already pretty good. So
yeah, I agree. If you're going to like a cheap bat from San Diego, I would rather find a little bit of extra money and get to Machado or get to Franmil Reyes, who
Reyes,
these guys give like they give you massive upside at relatively cheap price points.
For sure. I mean, Reyes, we know while he's going to, it's not as much that he strikes. Well, he strikes out a decent amount, but he's also just going to have games where he gives you 0 for 4, with 2-3 Ks. But he also has enough pop to where he can put a huge dent in tournament lineups in a good way and be significantly less owned. So I think that's a good point. Plus, he's really not that expensive either. All right, let's keep going. Minnesota and Houston, Verlander and Odorizzi. Look, I wrote the deep dive I started this morning, and I'm writing it, and we got the Minnesota lineup early, and I look at it, and I go, oh, man, no Nelson Cruz, no Estudillo. Replace them with Jake Cave and Mitch Garver. Cave has the highest K rate really on this team against righties. Garver's around 24-25%. That may only be 2 batters, but that's pretty significant. And let me add that Verlander's strikeout rate against lefties since the start of 2016. So you got a lot there. 33%. I really only expected today for there to be about 4 lefties in the lineup. Well, now you're going to have 6 of them. Adrianza, Cave, Gonzalez, Rosario, Polanco, and Keller. Look, there are still a decent amount of guys in this lineup that don't strike out, but compared to what this lineup could have been with Estudillo and Nelson Cruz in it, those 2 batters can make a pretty significant difference for such a good pitcher like Justin Verlander.
Yeah, I completely agree. If it were their full strength lineup and everyone were healthy, I'd still really like Verlander because he's just that good of a pitcher.
Right.
But taking, not having Cruz or Astudillo in there, it just makes the lineup more appealing, especially because once you get to the bottom of the order, you can pick up more strikeouts with Cave, like you said, with Garver. I think, it's still a top of the order that can do damage with Keller and Rosario and Polanco. Like, they're still good hitters that are tough to strike out, but it just thins out the lineup to where you don't have to get as deep into it for the good matchups to start popping up.
Exactly. This is your top pitcher today?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, me too. And once that lineup came out, it kind of solidified it. I really like some of the bats for Houston too, specifically, and I'll toss it over to you, Bregman. Bregman, if you take since the start of last year, Bregman grades out top 5 or third best in the league against curveballs. I think 7th or 5th best against sliders. Odorizzi's 2 go-to pitches. He'll mix the splitter in a bit, but the curve and the slider is what he's going to use mostly to right-handed hitters. And really, not many guys hit breaking balls as well as Bregman. I just really find this to be a spectacular spot for Bregman. What are you doing with Houston's offense here?
They're right up there with Boston and Atlanta's my favorite stacks. George Springer not being in the lineup hurts a bit, but at the same time, that also saves you some money in the in the stack. So I think that's fine. Odorizzi throughout his career has been worse against righties than lefties. He's been a little bit better in terms of strikeouts over the last couple of years since he did add the slider in, but he does still give up power. And you have so many guys in this lineup that have power from the right side and that don't strike out. I'm with you on Bregman being my favorite guy because he is their best breaking ball hitter. But, right now I have him as my top third baseman. I have Altuve as my top second baseman. I have Correa as my top shortstop. I have Chirinos as my top catcher. So it's just a team, and I'm getting a good amount of Tyler White. It's a team that I'm just going to get tons of, and if they don't come through, then oh well.
All right. Yeah, I agree with you. Again, going back to the fact that there aren't any pitchers on this slate where I just say load up against them entirely. That it's such a phenomenal matchup. I think you could say that for Atlanta, but maybe for one or two others, but I'm not in love with any of them. Houston here is one of the teams where I think you can do that with. And look, Odorizzi's a pretty league average pitcher. I don't have an issue with him, but I just like the other side of this so much more. And if you're not stacking them, guys like Bregman make a lot of sense. Correa at a shortstop position that either other guys are way overpriced or just aren't good is also in a really good spot. And of course, Jose Altuve leading off here is great as well. Do you want to talk about anything else in this matchup? Anything from Minnesota? Anything Odorizzi? Any other hitters?
I guess the only other thing to point out, and you and I talk about it a lot with Houston, is that the other reason they're an appealing stack is even if they are going to be one of the highest owned stacks in terms of total exposure, they give you a lot of upside at the bottom with guys like White and Chirinos. Even Marisnik has a pop when he makes contact, so it lets you stack and be contrarian. If you do something other than like Altuve through Gurriel.
Right, that's a good point. All right, Milwaukee and Colorado. I was curious to see what this lineup would look like. Was assuming Yelich wouldn't be in it. That is the case. You have Lorenzo Cain and then Yasmani Grandal batting second, Braun, and then Aguilar, who's been horrible. I mean, horrible, but is dirt cheap everywhere, batting cleanup against the lefty. Moustakas, Hernan Perez, who's got a career ISO north of 200 against lefties. I thought he may have been batting second. He's not. Ben Gamel, Orlando Arcia, and Zach Davies. I respect Freeland, but I'm a sucker for Milwaukee facing lefties when they run out, Kane and Braun, and as bad as Aguilar's been, I always am attracted to this team when facing lefties, especially because a lot of them aren't, like Braun has not been great against righties, so on some sites his price is depressed when he faces a string of righties and then he gets a lefty. I think he's like 2,800 on FanDuel today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you in that they have power. Braun is my favorite hitter from Milwaukee, but I'm getting a lot more Kyle Freeland than I am Milwaukee bats. Yeah,
all right, tell me why.
Clearly talking two-pitcher sites, but just because pitching's not very good in the mid-range. You have my favorite pitcher that we'll get to later, but when the other options are like Tanner Roark or Manny Banuelos or whoever else, Michael Wacha, Freeland's just a pretty decent pitcher, and the fact that Milwaukee is missing two of their best hitters, in particular Christian Yelich, even though he is a lefty, it just thins the lineup out a little bit. You get Grandal from his worst side of the plate batting second. Aguilar, he has some power if you look back previous seasons, which I obviously think we should be doing, but he has been absolutely awful, and that's worth noting. Then you get lefty and Moustakas, you get Ben Gamel, you get Arcia, you get a pitcher. It's not as deep a Milwaukee lineup as you normally get, and Freeland does a pretty good job of limiting damage against him. Now you get him outside of Coors Field, which certainly shouldn't hurt. So I just don't think he's really any worse than other pitchers on the slate.
Yeah, look, it's fair. I'm not saying he's any worse than any others on this slate. I will say that, look, it's not Coors Field. Definitely not. But it's not like he's going to a great park either. So
no.
I'm actually, I don't know. I'd probably side with Milwaukee here only because the one big thing for me is that a bunch of these guys, if you wanted to pay up for pitching, Milwaukee does allow for that on certain sites. Like Braun isn't super cheap, but Aguilar, and he's been bad, I get it, is pretty inexpensive. And then guys like Hernan Perez are also pretty cheap. So it's not the toughest team to stack either. Especially you look on a site like FanDuel, Aguilar's minimum salary, Braun's 28, Lorenzo Cain is 36, and I think Hernan Perez is like 20. No, he's also minimum salary. I wish FanDuel was a two-pitcher site today.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, you could load up any pitchers you want, stack Milwaukee, and it would probably work. They're really cheap, man.
Yeah. So I'm looking through like my individual hitter exposures right now, and like I said, Braun, if I were like hand building a lineup, picking one guy out would be the one that I'm most interested in. But my highest owned is Aguilar just because of the price tag.
Yeah.
But I still have him right now as my sixth highest owned first baseman on DraftKings at 3,300.
Okay. And by the way, if you are playing over there on Yahoo, they got the MLB 10K guaranteed, 2K to first. Not a lot of spots left, $10 entry fee. But looking over there, Braun is 13, Aguilar's minimum salary, Hernan Perez minimum salary, Lorenzo Cain 17, Yasmani Grandal 15. Again, really cheap on Yahoo. So if you are thinking that this is a Milwaukee team that can produce against Freeland, who I respect, but I'm giving the edge to Milwaukee here tonight at Miller Park. I think you're getting really good price points on them on FanDuel and on Yahoo. What do you make of the other side of this one, Adam, against Zach Davies?
Not a ton that I like because a lot of these guys are really expensive. I do like Charlie Blackmon a lot leading off against Davies. Davies is another pitcher that I think is just kind of very, very, very average. And he doesn't give up a ton of power. He doesn't strike guys out. But you have Blackmon at a reasonable price tag. I would be interested in Story, Arenado, and Dahl, except they're more expensive than guys like Mookie Betts and Chris Davis and guys that, other outfielders I like, Ronald Acuna. So not getting to them as much. Bregman, obviously at third base is a priority. Correa is a priority for me over Story. So Blackman's the one that I think, really stands out to me the most.
Okay. I don't think Murphy's the craziest play either. Hitting a lot of fly balls early on, but not a ton of hard contact, not super surprising either. But Murphy's coming in. It depends where. I think he's pretty expensive on DraftKings, right? Yeah, 47.
He's 47 on DraftKings.
Yeah, $3K on FanDuel and 15 on Yahoo. A really great lefty power park, which is one of the reasons I like him. And look, Zach Davies. If there's one thing about Davies is he doesn't give up a ton of runs. He's decent at run prevention, but he very rarely misses any bats when facing left-handed hitters. All right, 3 more to go. White Sox and Baltimore. You and I discussed this a little earlier in the day. John Means and Manny Banuelos. Hey, that changeup looks really good. I mentioned this to Emac on the early bird. The changeup looks great for John Means, and the White Sox are horrible against changeups as a team. Leury Garcia being like the only guy that's even remotely decent against the pitch over the past couple of seasons. What do you make of this pitching matchup?
So I'm never confident when I recommend or roster an Orioles pitcher because I'm just gun shy after doing it for years and it blowing up in my face constantly. But I buy into Means' stuff. There's a couple articles out there about him working out at a facility this offseason to improve his velocity and to improve his changeup using all the pitch tracking stuff that some of the pitchers are using. And we've seen a spike in fastball velocity from around 90 to 92 miles per hour, but also a 2 to 3 mile an hour drop in his changeup velocity, which now he's getting an 11 to 12 mile an hour difference between his fastball and his changeup. That's a really good differential to have, especially when those are basically the two pitches that you're going to throw. And on top of that, he gets a lot of movement on his changeup. Out of all pitchers who have thrown 100 changeups this year, he leads the league in vertical movement. He gets some pretty good arm side run on it as well. It actually, in terms of movement, is almost identical to the changeup that Marco Estrada throws, which, while we might think of Estrada as a guy that we like to take hitters against in DFS, that's because he's a fly ball pitcher that gives up some home runs. His changeup has been the pitch that's kept him in the major leagues for all these years, and Means, at least so far, again, he's only thrown 130 changeups to righties this year. But he has a 60% ground ball percentage on them as well. So that's one difference between them, where he gets ground balls when he's not getting a swing and miss, whereas Estrada gets fly balls. He also, out of those pitchers that have thrown 100 changeups, has the 5th highest whiff per swing percentage. So it's been a really, really effective pitch for him. It looks like it's probably very, very difficult for hitters to distinguish from his fastball as well, based on how he throws it and the way that it moves. And then you get such a big differential in velocity. I think that it's actually a legitimately good pitch. And on this slate where he's facing a White Sox team that'll strike out a lot, and there's not a lot of other pitchers to like, I have Means as my second highest owned pitcher behind Verlander.
I'm with you. It's scary as hell, but here's the thing. He has a 2-pitch arsenal. Against other teams, it would definitely scare me more. Against the White Sox, not as much. And it's also a team that strikes out in abundance. This team is going to give you a good amount of strikeouts. And going back to that changeup, this is another team that, as a unit, really bad against the pitch. And everything you just pointed out too. I mean, good movement on it. Hard to differentiate between the fastball. On a lot of slates, I don't think we'd be talking, this highly of John Means, but it's not like the mid-range is all that crowded with great talent today. And another thing too, like, even if you aren't playing Means, good luck getting up to some of these Chicago bats that cost a ridiculous amount. I mean, on DraftKings specifically, Abreu, Moncada, Anderson are all above 5K, some of them well above 5K. Lurie Garcia, 4,600. McCann at 4K. These guys are not cheap at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. And that is something that so for one, my interest in Means is pretty DraftKings specific. I don't think he's a bad play on Yahoo, but he is more expensive, or in the same price range. Like he's closer to Soroka. He's he's more expensive than Roark. He's only $100 less than Eduardo Rodriguez, which I think is a big difference. On DraftKings, though, you get him as like the third cheapest pitcher, and it's a matchup where you're probably either going to see Chicago strike out a lot or hit a lot of home runs. And Chicago's too expensive for me to get their bats. So just kind of, I guess, from a portfolio standpoint, it makes sense to be hoping for the strikeout side of it too.
Right. It's just really not easy to get unless you're going with 2 7K pitchers. And one of them probably would have been Means, so that's not going to work. You want to pair Tanner Roark and Kyle Freeland together to get a White Sox stack, go for it, but that doesn't sound all that appealing. What about Benuelos here? 4 innings last time. He is – I don't think Benuelos is a bad pitcher. I don't think he's great either. Zips and Steamers both have him projected like just shy of a batter per inning as far as strikeouts go, but they have his FIP sitting up, high 4, low 5. You're going to get strikeouts in this Orioles lineup. That's one thing. Trey Mancini's out of the lineup today. You just look from top to bottom. It's hardly an imposing lineup. Chris Davis is in there against the lefty. But how long does Benuelos go? And are you willing to pay a mid 7K price point for him? Because, man, that is a very unimposing Baltimore lineup.
Yeah, right now he's my 6th highest owned guy on DraftKings. As far as the mid-range guys, I got less of him than Means, Roark, Freeland. I got a little bit more of him than like Zach Davies. So it's basically that it's just a really appealing Baltimore lineup for him to face. No Mancini makes a huge difference when you're talking about right-handed power in this lineup, or right-handed bats in general, basically being Villar, Nunez, and Mancini as far as guys that are going to do damage. No Mancini makes a huge difference. So getting to somebody in Morelos just as a different option, so that I don't have 100% Means or something like that, is perfectly fine. He's not someone that my night is revolving around, though.
What else do you have from this game?
Jonathan Villar, I'm getting a pretty healthy amount of exposure to. Second base shortstop eligibility on DraftKings is nice. Reasonable price tag, reasonably good hitter. So I have him he's my second highest owned second baseman right now, behind Altuve, basically the same as Ozzie Albies for me. I have him behind Correa and Bogarts at shortstop.
Okay. 2 games to go. Kansas City, Tampa Bay. Oh, hey, before we do it, I want to let you know you can get 50% off your first month at awesomeo.com. And it's very simple. All you have to do is use the promo code DEEPERDIVE. One word, not 2, DEEPERDIVE, to get our ownership projections, our player projections, the Fantasy Cruncher add-on, the lineup builder, articles from Adam, myself, all of Josh Engelman's hard work, Alex Baker, Awesomeo himself, his rankings, projections, and much more. And, of course, all of our content for baseball, basketball, hockey, golf, NASCAR, MMA, football, and any other sport that has DFS, we're covering it at awesomeo.com. And premium Slack chat where you can hang out and talk around the clock. We're in there, and as well as all of our other premium subs. So if you want to hop in, use the promo code DEEPERDIVE when you sign up. 50% off your first month at awesomeo.com, and say what's up in the premium Slack chat when you head over there. If you need help, just let us know and we'll get you in there. And any issues you have, hit us up and we'll help you out. It's Deeper Dive, one word. Kansas City, Tampa Bay. Ryan Stanek, Brad Keller. Chirinos was originally expected to start. Would have loved that. Probable long reliever now. Still a very good pitcher against a team that has strikeouts, but how does this change your opinion of Chirinos now that he's expected to come out of the bullpen?
just makes it less appealing because I'm expecting, five plus innings from him as opposed to the chance to get like 7. And so that matters. And especially when, pitching's not great in the mid tier, but he's also one of the more expensive options. You're paying almost as much for him as, you would be for like Mike Soroka. So I'm not really getting the Torinos here, not really getting the Kansas City bats either. Once again, it's a really expensive team. I mean, almost every team's expensive, but just not getting to either side of Torinos or the Kansas City bats.
Me neither. It's a shame because if Torinos was starting here, he might be my favorite mid-range pitcher on the slate. Knowing that, okay, maybe he can go 90-plus pitches as we've seen him do in starts before. Like, there are a decent amount of strikeouts here. And unfortunately, it's, you're not going to see it. Now, this lineup, I don't know. No Chris Owings. Oh, no, Owings is in there. I'm sorry. He's batting 8th. There's someone that strikes out a lot that isn't in there. Maybe not. I can't remember now. I know Billy Hamilton's not in there, right? Yeah. So it's tough to get there. And like you said, if Torinos was like 6,500, that'd be a totally different story. I'd have a whole lot more interest, but you're definitely paying more for him than you'd want to, knowing that he probably only goes 5 innings. What about Brad Keller and this Tampa Bay offense?
Yeah, I'm not really getting the Keller either, just not a high strikeout guy. And it's a dangerous enough Tampa Bay offense that I'm not getting there. I'm not getting to a lot of the Tampa Bay hitters either. There is one in particular that I really like as a value play here, though, and that's Nate Lowe, who was just called up recently, has plenty of power, projects as a good hitter. Steamer projection is a 113 WRC plus, 174 ISO, has 65 grade raw power. So it's a guy that can hit home runs. Not a particularly high strikeout percentage. Steamer has a 21.6% strikeout projection, 9.6% walk projection. So good plate discipline skills, pretty good power, just grades out as an above average hitter. And he's $3,100 on DraftKings batting 5th. So I like him as a value option quite a bit.
All right. Anything else on this one before we get to the last game?
I don't think so.
All right. San Francisco and the Dodgers. Kenta Maeda, Jeff Samardzija. Clearly a good park shift for Kenta Maeda here. I don't think anyone's going to argue that. Run total right now for the San Francisco Giants is at 3.7. It's the second lowest on the slate. And lineups here, I don't think we have one, but what do you make of Kenta Maeda against the Giants? And by the way, 97 on DraftKings. He's 89 on FanDuel, and on Yahoo, Kenta Maeda is coming in at $41. Basically, a little bit more than Soroka, a little bit less than Wheeler.
Yeah, it's really site dependent for me. On DraftKings, I'm not really getting to him just because he's more expensive than Wheeler still, and there are just other spots that I'm going to. But on Yahoo, I think that the price tag's really, really appealing. So I'd have more interest in him there. 8,900 on FanDuel is fine. Similar, price point to Wheeler. So I could see, spreading out some exposure between them. But on DraftKings, I'm not getting there. It's obviously a really good park. It's a bad San Francisco offense. Probably 5 or 6 lefties in there for San Francisco. And where he's priced up, I just would rather save a little bit of money or find the money for Verlander.
What about the rest of this game? I mean, you have Samardzija on one side. The San Francisco team. I was looking at ownership earlier today at catcher on DraftKings, where you have to play one, and still he's come down a bit. But Buster Posey, still the highest projected catcher on DraftKings. That feels pretty ugly, but it's a really rough position. Any bat hitting interest here for San Francisco before we talk about the Dodgers?
Brandon Belt's my favorite from San Francisco. Left-handed bat against Kenta Maeda. We know he's a lot better against righties. We know Belt's a really good hitter overall. He hits well no matter where he is. Obviously his power numbers would be better if he never played in San Francisco, but they're good enough even there. And he's cheap on a slate where it's tough to find cheap upside. So Belt pretty clearly is my favorite guy here. Then, I would go to Posey just because of the position.
All right. What about Dodger bats?
I have him as a top 5 stack, even though I hate the ballpark. They're one of the cheaper stacks that offers you upside. Obviously, Bellinger and Peterson are 2 guys that you really want. And, are expensive. But then beyond that, you get Corey Seager, Justin Turner, AJ Pollock, all for cheap. Kike Hernandez is inexpensive. Jeff Samardzija is really not good. I wish this game were being played somewhere else, but the price tags, I think, are depressed a little bit more than they should be for, this matchup. Looking at the pricing on other sites, I think on FanDuel, they're a little bit more expensive. They're still not, overly priced, but they're not quite as appealing as they were on DraftKings. On Yahoo, you have really appealing price tags again. $14 for Seager, $12 for Turner, $13 for Pollock, $14 for Muncy. You're just getting a lot of power upside and a really good offensive team for price tags that clearly are factoring in the ballpark.
All right. Well, let's do our top stacks then, and then we'll head out, turn it over to the Live Before Lock crew coming up 7 o'clock till 7:05 p.m. Eastern time, actually. We've said it a lot throughout the show. No real clear-cut, amazing ones. You have Atlanta and Houston and a couple more in there, but let's hear your top stacks for today, Adam.
Houston, Atlanta, Boston, Washington, Dodgers.
Okay, yeah, Houston, Atlanta, Boston for me. I'm going to, instead of the Dodgers, I'm going to throw Milwaukee in there, especially on FanDuel and Yahoo, where they're just pretty much free everywhere. And I do like the top of the Mets lineup. Not a team that I love the bottom half of the order, but I do like the top, 4 or 5 in that Mets order against Tanner Roark. So that'll do it. Any other thoughts? We got a few minutes here. We could close out a bit early, but any other thoughts on this slate? Any strategy pointers before we head out for the day?
I think that as far as the pitching goes, it's especially if you're like playing large field tournaments but not max entering them, and you're just like trying to find the easiest way to win. It's one where you really should be willing to take on risk at pitcher for low owned guys, whether it's Rodriguez or one of the SP2s that nobody's really going to, just because all the pitchers have flaws. Like obviously we're going to do the best that we can, and we're rostering the guys that we project the best, but it's just not a big difference in projection for a lot of pitchers on this slate.
All right, fair enough. That'll do it for today. Stick around, Live Before Lock. Remember, check out our lovely sponsor, Yahoo Sports. Over there, it is sports.yahoo.com/dailyfantasy. We will, of course, drop the links into the chat. And, hey, before you head out, if you appreciate the content, you want to see more of it, hit us with a thumbs up, like the video. It helps us greatly, and we really appreciate it. Subscribe and hit that notification bell as well so you always know when content's going to drop next. Till next time, good luck. We'll see you back here tomorrow. 15-game slate on Tuesday night. Live Before Lock coming up next. Good luck tonight, friends. We'll see you tomorrow.